Hello and welcome back. Um, Today we're going to be looking at a couple different topics. The first is going to be an issue involving writing mechanics that I'm calling quote integration, right? So this is going to look at how we can include material from other writers in our own writing in a way that's kind of elegant and simple. This is to be honest, it's kind of a difficult thing to master. And with practice, you will get better at it. But I wanted to take a little time today to just kind of go through a basic structure to help you do that. And then we're going to look at Dreamland and kind of think about how Quinones has put this story together because it's a very complex story with lots of interwoven plot lines. He's spanning different geographical locales from Mexico to the United States, and several places in the U.S. He's also looking at different class levels, people in different professions, different industries, and I'm really kind of blown away by how he's able to integrate all of this into a coherent story. And so I thought we might spend a little time thinking about how he does that. Um, Up here on the screen, we have the cover of the young adult edition of Dreamland, and I thought the subtitle was kind of interesting, "The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic." I mean, this already sort of suggests that there might be untrue tales about the causes of this drug crisis, right? He's already kind of announcing that there are competing versions of this story. You know, blame is assigned in different ways and to different people. And he has a really original take on the problem that I think really broke new ground. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. By the way, up here there's this quote from a review by Mark Maron, comparing this to Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser. Um, Schlosser writes kind of similarly broad nonfiction works that try to take on a big problem through doing lots of kind of on the ground research. There's another book by Schlosser I love called Command and Control. This is about the U.S. nuclear arsenal and accidents that have happened with nuclear weapons over the years. And so if you're kind of interested in Dreamland, another writer I would really recommend is Eric Schlosser. Okay. All right. So let's think about first of all reported speech. So Quinones in this nonfiction work, what he's doing, he's gone around and he's interviewed many people. He's relying on different kinds of source materials like documents, police reports, um, studies from the FDA, right? And so he's constantly having to give the reader some sense of what's going on either in those interviews or those documents to give us their perspective, right? Now, this is very helpful for a writer because it means you don't have to make up everything from whole cloth. You don't have to invent everything out of your own head. Um, that can get kind of exhausting, but it also presents a question to the writer, which is, what's the best way to present this material? Okay. Now, I think in my experience, it seems like most of us tend to rely on quoting directly. I, I certainly think in student writing, I see more direct quotations in quotation marks than I do other forms of referencing reported speech or reported text. Okay. So other forms would be paraphrasing and summarizing. Okay. And just to review, quoting is when you're um, giving the word for word um, text of the writer or speaker that you are referencing. Paraphrasing is when you're giving a somewhat looser approximation of what they said or wrote. Okay. So you are essentially typically staying around the same length, um, and you're not radically condensing it down as you might in a summary, right? So I might summarize um, a novel in one sentence, okay? But if I was paraphrasing a novel, the paraphrase would have to be almost as long as the novel, okay? So to paraphrase means to restate something in your own words while preserving the original meaning. It's not a summary. right? It keeps the same core meaning, but it's going to use different words and sentence structure, and the key here being your own, right? So um, paraphrasing is a really great way to kind of think through what the material that you might otherwise have quoted, what it means to you, and then just say that. Okay. Um, and paraphrasing is really useful because it helps us clarify, simplify, avoid plagiarism, and explain complex ideas. Where this comes up a lot in student writing is sometimes a writer will quote from a text, and they're using that quote as evidence for a claim that they are making. However, the reader sometimes can't really tell if the writer understands what that quote really means. There might be a kind of a misunderstanding happening, um, or the quote might just be simply dropped into the sentence or the paragraph without enough sense that the writer knows the work that that quote is supposed to be doing. So one thing I really recommend is try out paraphrasing a little bit more because um, I know for me, whenever I paraphrase something that I was going to quote, it takes a minute to actually clarify in my mind, okay, what exactly is this quote saying? And maybe beyond that, even what aspect of this quote is most relevant for my argument, or the point that I'm making in this moment of my own piece of writing. Okay. So paraphrasing gives us several benefits. One of them is helps us just write in a more concise fashion. Um, Sometimes quotes can get quite unwieldy. One issue is a quote might be longer than you want it to be, but there also might be, important moments in a piece of text, and you kind of want to take a little from the beginning and a little from the end. And rather than using an ellipses to just mash it together, you might just kind of paraphrase the point that you want to make. Okay. And again, it's going to paraphrasing well will confirm your understanding of the reference text, both for your reader and for yourself. And then this last point, I think is actually quite important. Paraphrasing can help express some distance from the original source. And Quinones does this a lot. And I think I have an idea as to why he does this. We'll get to that in a second. But an example of a paraphrase would be here, this quote from Nelson Mandela. So the original quotation is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Okay, now if we wanted to put that into our own words, we might say Mandela argued that learning and knowledge represent the strongest tool available for transforming society. Okay, so we've essentially kept Mandela's meaning. We haven't, you know, slanted it really in any way. Generally, a paraphrase is just supposed to be kind of as objective as possible, to kind of get across the meaning that the original was conveying. Okay, but I wanted to look at a moment from Dreamland. This is from page 115 if you want to look it up. Um, so this is in a chapter called "We Realize This is Corporate." And this is one of the things Quinones does really well is he takes a problem that you might think you know the cause of, and he starts to hypothesize about other culprits who are contributing to this issue. And in this section, he's talking about how the business world has kind of contributed to the drug crisis. Okay. So there's a conversation that happens between Gary Oxman and Sharon Kelly. And I think I'll just read it to you and then kind of fill you in on what I noticed about this. It says, in the spring of 1999, Oxman found himself one afternoon in a meeting with Sharon Kelly, a Multnomah County commissioner in downtown Portland. It was budget season. Oxman, a thin, fit fellow with curly hair, a mustache, and a goatee, was now the chief health officer for Multnomah County. Heroin addiction was rampant and the hepatitis C virus was spreading across Portland, Kelly said. How would the health department like some money to pay for treatment and services for Hep C patients? That money would help a great deal, he said. Thousands of people were not infected with the virus. Okay, so one of the reasons I think Quinones is choosing to paraphrase instead of quote here is that if we think about his process of reporting the story, he went and talked to Gary Oxman, but he did not talk to Sharon Kelly, as far as I remember, and certainly not in this section. So what probably happened is Oxman is recalling a conversation that happened 15 years prior to Quinones, right? And so he himself is kind of paraphrasing the conversation, right? And so and Quinones is probably taking notes. He might be on a laptop, but this is probably not going to be an exact transcription of the conversation Oxman had with Quinones, and it's almost certainly not. I should say the version that Oxman gives to Quinones is also probably a little fuzzy. So by paraphrasing instead of quoting, Quinones is avoiding the problem of sort of pretending to have a more accurate record than he actually has, right? So we kind of understand the way he's written it that this is a kind of a recording of a recording, if you will, right? It's Quinones's memory of Oxman's memory, okay? And this actually can sort of help inject a little more honesty into the writing because we're not under the impression that we're getting the exact conversation that happened between Oxman and Kelly, but we are getting the main important points coming through. Okay. Okay. Now, in your own writing, there's a kind of analogy people use to think about how you should introduce a quote, and this could also go for a paraphrase or even a summary that we call it the quote sandwich. Okay, so move myself out of the way here. The basic idea is you want to introduce the material you're referring to. This might be providing context, uh, introducing who the speaker is, any number of context that will help your reader interpret the material in the quoted section or the paraphrase section, right? Then, second, you're going to provide that material. In this case, it's a quote. And then after that, you are going to explain the quote and how it's significant for your argument. Okay. Now, you shouldn't think that you have to do this all in one sentence, right? Sometimes, especially if you have a longer quote, you just need a little more space. So, and actually, Quinones, I noticed I was hunting around Dreamland trying to find an example of a sentence in which he does all three of these in one sentence, and I couldn't find a single one. What Quinones tends to do is he starts a lot of sentences with quotes, and then so it'll be the first half of the sentence is the quoted material, and then he will at the second half of the sentence he'll give his impression of what that quote signifies. Okay, it's kind of interesting if you start looking closely at writers, like how do they deal with this problem? Because this is a problem for everybody. Okay. Um, so how this would go is you generally are going to have an introductory phrase like according to Quinones or as the authors acknowledge in the piece. And generally you're going to have a comma and then quotation marks. Okay. And then you can give your quote if it's a quotation. Um, if it's not a quotation, you would just provide the summary, and then you're going to give your own analysis or explanation of the significance. Okay. So if we go back to, actually, yeah, let's go here. Let's give you an example of Quinones doing this. So I've provided a little more context up top here, but the step one is just this move here, Quinones writes. So let me read the whole thing. In Dreamland, Sam Quinones explains how the spread of prescription painkillers and heroin devastated communities across the United States. One reason the epidemic became so widespread is that drug dealers created a convenient and efficient delivery system that made heroin easy to obtain. Quinones writes, the Jalisco boys were innovators, using a pizza delivery system for black tar heroin. This means that the dealers treated heroin like a consumer product and delivered it directly to customers, making addiction more accessible and helping the opioid crisis spread rapidly throughout small towns and suburbs. Okay, now this is very clearly written. I think it's fairly straightforward prose, but it's really good because he communicates so much in just a few lines. So here I bolded explains how, because here he's giving the broad context, right? What's just the main thing that Quinones is doing here? And then in the next sentence, he's going to kind of narrow down to a more specific point, saying one reason the epidemic became so widespread. And then he gets into this idea of this kind of new delivery system. And then he's going to tell us, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This is a review of Dreamland. And so here they're introducing Quinones and saying Quinones writes, that's the intro, and then we get the quote. And I think that it's a really interesting sort of analogy that Quinones uses here, the pizza delivery system, because this is something that is, I think for most people, fairly run of the mill. Something we're all used to. It's also quite suburban. Pizza's being delivered in cars kind of puts us in mind of suburbia rather than very dense cities or very rural areas. Um, and also, it helps explain part of why these drug dealers did not get very much attention from the police, at least in the early days of this crisis. They were, delivering small amounts. They would kind of come and go quietly. They kept a low profile, and you might not notice them in the same way you might not notice a pizza delivery person or like an Amazon delivery person or something. Okay, and then we get this statement here. Um, Dealers treated heroin like a consumer product. And this is one of the main through lines in Dreamland is that one of the innovations from a kind of business perspective was that these kind of this drug network worked not by using muscle and weapons and standing on street corners, but they kind of innovated a new marketing and delivery system that was able to fly under the radar for quite a long time. Okay, so when you paraphrase, oh, you know what? Sorry, that got in there twice.